Species dysphoria. Species dysphoria is a condition in which someone feels they are meant to be a non-human creature, most likely an animal, as if they are an animal trapped in a human body. It is in no way related to clinical lycanthropy, which is the delusion of having been transformed into a wolf or otherwise perceiving oneself as physically being a wolf. It is under heavy dispute that there is any comparison between this and gender dysphoria, as the latter is a symptom of a medically recognized condition with scientific explanations beyond just as a mental disorder, while species dysphoria is seen as only a subculture that may come with other medical overtones. This can relate it to therianthropy, when someone feels that they are an animal in a spiritual or psychological way. Species dysphoria is a type of dysphoria used by Othican or Therians. People with species dysphoria may not feel human spiritually or emotionally, and feel disconnected from their physical body. Species dysphoria is usually used by people who feel connected to animals, but some people with species dysphoria can identify with mythical creatures like vampires, or objects such as dolls. Bad things do happen. How I respond to them defines my character and the quality of my life. I can choose to sit in perpetual sadness, immobilized by the gravity of my loss, or I can choose to rise from the pain and treasure the most precious gift I have, life itself. It has been said that time heals all wounds. I don't agree. The wounds remain. Time, the mind, protecting its sanity, covers them with some scar tissue and the pain lessens, but it is never gone. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Remember, the world is here for you. On the channel biography there is an email address. You can write, record yourself, and share the world your pain anonymously. Clinical lycanthropy is a rare psychiatric syndrome that involves a delusion that the affected person can transform into, has transformed into, or is, a non-human animal. Its name is associated with the mythical condition of lycanthropy, a supernatural affliction in which humans are said to physically shift into wolves. Catherine Clark Kroger has written that several parts of the Bible refer to King Nebuchadnezzar's behavior in the book of Daniel 4 as being a manifestation of clinical lycanthropy. Neurologist Andrew J. Lana has written that the fate of Odysseus's crew due to the magic of Circe may be one of the earliest examples of clinical lycanthropy. It is believed that the Armenian king Tiridates III also had this disorder. He was cured by Gregory the Illuminator. According to Persian tradition, the blue-eyed Prince Majd al-Dawla was experiencing an illusion that he was a cow. He was cured by Ibn Sina. Notions that lycanthropy was due to a medical condition go back to the 7th century, when the Alexandrian physician Paulus Aeginetor attributed lycanthropy to melancholy or an excess of black bile. During 1563, a Lutheran physician named Johann Weyer wrote that werewolves had an imbalance in their melancholic humor and exhibited the physical symptoms of paleness, a dry tongue and a great thirst, as well as sunken, dim and dry eyes. Even King James VI in his 1597 treatise Demonology does not blame werewolf behavior on delusions created by the devil, but an excess of melancholy as the culprit, which causes some men to believe that they are wolves and to counterfeit the actions of these animals. The perception of an association between mental illness and animalistic behavior can be traced throughout the history of folklore from many different countries. Clinical lycanthropy is a type of delusional misidentification syndrome of the self, and it often overlaps with other delusional misidentification syndromes. For example, there is a case study of a psychiatric patient who had both clinical lycanthropy and Cotard delusion. In rare cases, individuals may believe that other people have transformed into animals. This has been termed lycanthropic intermetamorphosis and lycanthropy spectrum. A 2009 study reported that, after the consumption of the drug MDMA, ecstasy, a man displayed symptoms of paranoid psychosis by claiming that his relatives had changed into various animals such as a boar, a donkey and a horse. Clinical lycanthropy is a very rare condition and is largely considered to be an idiosyncratic expression of a psychotic or dissociative episode caused by another condition such as dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder or clinical depression. It has also been associated with drug intoxication and withdrawal cerebrovascular disease, traumatic brain injury, dementia, delirium, and seizures. However, there are suggestions that certain neurological conditions and cultural influences may result in the expression of the human-animal transformation theme that defines the condition. Signs and symptoms. Affected individuals believe that they are in the process of transforming into an animal or have already transformed into an animal. This is also known as dissociative identity disorder. Clinical lycanthropy has been associated with the altered state of mind that accompanies psychosis, the mental state that typically involves delusions and hallucinations, with the transformation only seeming to happen in the mind and behavior of the affected person. A study on clinical lycanthropy from the McLean Hospital reported on a series of cases and proposed some diagnostic criteria by which clinical lycanthropy could be recognized. A patient reports in a moment of lucidity or reminiscence that they sometimes feel as an animal or have felt like one. A patient behaves in a manner that resembles animal behavior, for example howling, growling, or crawling. According to these criteria, either a delusional belief in current or past transformation or behavior that suggests a person thinks of themselves as transformed is considered evidence of clinical lycanthropy. The authors note that, although the condition seems to be an expression of psychosis, there is no specific diagnosis of mental or neurological illness associated with its behavioral consequences. It also seems that clinical lycanthropy is not specific to an experience of human-to-wolf transformation. A wide variety of creatures have been reported as part of the shape-shifting experience. A review of the medical literature from early 2004 lists over 30 published cases of clinical lycanthropy, only the minority of which have wolf lycanthropy, or dog synanthropy, themes. Canines are certainly not uncommon, although the experience of being transformed into other animals such as a hyena, cat, horse, bird or tiger has been reported on more than one occasion. Transformation into frogs, and even bees, has been reported in some instances. The term ophidianthropy refers to the delusion that one has been transformed into a snake, of which 2 case studies have been reported. In Japan, transformation into foxes and dogs was common. A 1989 case study described how one individual reported a serial transformation, experiencing a change from human to dog, to horse, and then finally cat, before returning to the reality of human existence after treatment. There are also reports of people who experienced transformation into an animal only listed as unspecified. Neurological factors. One important factor may be differences or changes in parts of the brain known to be involved in representing body shape. For example, see proprioception and body image. A neuroimaging study of 2 people diagnosed with clinical lycanthropy showed that these areas display unusual activation, suggesting that when people report their bodies are changing shape, they may be genuinely perceiving those feelings. Treatment. Because clinical lycanthropy is strongly associated with psychotic disorders, antipsychotic medication is often an effective treatment. It may also be treated with antidepressants or mood stabilizers, in cases in which it is a symptom of depression or bipolar disorder. Patients with clinical lycanthropy may also benefit from a cultural approach to treatment, as the syndrome is generally agreed to be culture-bound. On the 15th of August, 2016, Martin County, Florida Sheriff's Office deputies found a 19-year-old male on top of a bloodied 59-year-old man, gnawing on his face, eating pieces of flesh, and making growling sounds. Officers tased, repeatedly kicked, and ultimately required a police dog's assistance in subduing the 19-year-old. Inside the garage of the home on Southeast Kokomo Lane, just north of the Palm Beach County line, deputies found a 53-year-old woman, beaten, bloodied and unresponsive. Ultimately, both the 59-year-old man and 53-year-old woman would die from their injuries. In the weeks ahead of this incident, the 19-year-old told family members he believed he was either half man, half horse or half man, half dog. Clinical psychologist Dr. Philip Resnick later assessed the 19-year-old as having clinical lycanthropy. A 20-year-old man was admitted to a mental hospital due to his increasingly agitated and erratic behaviors. During his initial evaluation, he was guarded and preoccupied. He had no previous psychiatric history. Over the next few days, he displayed increasingly psychotic, animal-like behaviors. These behaviors included howling loudly, running abruptly, and walking on all fours, known as quadrobics. He appeared to be internally stimulated. When asked about these behaviors, he was initially evasive but eventually admitted that he believed he was a werewolf and would periodically transform into a wolf. He started believing this after having visions of the devil years before and reported hearing random voices. The patient was started on ziprasidone and his symptoms gradually responded and his animal-like behaviors eventually ceased altogether. A 25-year-old man was sent for treatment during a period of excessive hand-washing, irritable behavior, decreased sleep, and acting like a buffalo. The patient reported that he had engaged in sexual activity with his buffalo and believed that buffalo cells had entered his body and were transforming him into a buffalo. He began obsessively washing his hands and genitals in order to avoid the transition. He saw himself as having buffalo body parts and became preoccupied about his appearance. He then began to act as a buffalo by nodding his head, walking on all fours, and seeking out hay and grass to eat. He was ultimately diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder and body dysmorphic disorder with delusional beliefs. He was treated with fluoxetine and risperidone, and after 6 months of pharmacotherapy, his body dysmorphia and hand-washing were both reduced. In Natalie Biantri's Wolf, animals and great acting are aplenty while narrative consistency is nowhere to be found. The picture spends 98 minutes trying to make statements on topics as varied as technology, love, and the meaning of normality, but ultimately fails to say anything worthwhile. Wolf follows Jacob George Mackay, a young man who suffers from species dysphoria and believes himself to be a wolf. confined by his parents to a mental health institution specializing in treating the condition. He and his fellow patients are subject to the zookeeper's, Paddy Considine, abusive treatments. During a full moon, he sneaks out of his room and meets Wildcat, Lily Rose Depp, a fellow patient. The two soon develop feelings for each other that led them to embrace their animal side. To Biantri's credit, at no point does the film devolve into comedy despite its tricky subject matter. A fight at the beginning between characters introduced as Bear and Squirrel could turn into farce, but instead serves the purpose of establishing the ambivalence of the institution toward the well-being of its patients. The parrot, constantly wearing an outlandish, fiery bird costume complete with a huge beak, is remembered not as the butt of a joke, but a character deeply traumatized after the zookeeper dared her to fly out the window as a part of her therapy. The film maintains a perpetually serious tone, revealing how the institution is a place of suffering and mental anguish. They are clearly dead set on results, with no regard for consequences. What the film seeks to achieve within that framing is less clear. The film tries to engage in a profound conversation on the human experience. The zookeeper, for example, believes that technology reconnects us with our human side, and that any measure used to reach what he views as normalcy is justified because humans are inherently superior to animals. His attempts fail, however, suggesting that what society and the medical authorities deem a mental illness might make for a valid and fulfilling alternative to modern life. But the narrative developments undermine the conclusion. Distinctly human romantic love, conversation, and intellectual ingenuity are framed as crucial to the protagonist's eventual success and shown to be a source of their happiness. An issue even graver is that Biantri's picture feels like a series of vaguely connected vignettes, with a very loose sense of narrative and temporal progression. Even the film's most climactic moments between its two protagonists are characterized by few verbal exchanges or emotions that would ground them at a given point in the narrative. The characters' continuous cycle of improvements and relapses make for what seems to be an accurate depiction of mental illness, but takes away the last opportunity to clearly establish the order of events through character growth, be it progress or regression. The result is a bizarrely indistinct yet perplexing and multifaceted story that, like a deck of cards or a Kafka novel, would make just as much sense if it were reshuffled. The supporting performances only add to the confusion. It's difficult to portray mental illness and erratic behaviors empathetically and convincingly. It's even more difficult with employees of an asylum. Their job is full of interactions that seem unnatural and exaggerated. Wolf cannot surmount the challenges and simply misses the mark. The stiltedness of the portrayals of patients and especially the staff, more reminiscent of telemarketers or motivational speakers than real humans, breaks the immersion. Mackay stands out, but his skill ultimately doesn't lend itself enough toward narrative development. Granted, Jacob's inspection of his face, the subtle touching of his nose, as if to make sure it's real, conveys the peculiarity of the young man's condition much more aptly than any conversation would. His struggle against the moonlight, the drawn-out sequences of his stealthy movement on all fours, and the howling are brilliant and make for a convincing depiction. But even inspired portrayal becomes tedious. After half an hour, the film's emphasis on body movements and facial expressions turns into little more than self-serving, if captivating, acting exercises without clear purpose. Wolf can best be described as having no clear purpose. Self-contradictory and nonsensical, it could have been a mesmerizing short film. But as is, the picture offers 98 minutes of head-scratching accompanied by George Mackay's fantastic, if largely futile, acting. To preface, I would like to say that as someone who also experiences gender dysphoria, GD, says Anonymous, it is both similar and different. I don't really like the term species dysphoria, SD, for this reason. The two experiences are not the same and not really equitable. Calling it species dysphoria isn't really the best descriptor. For me, species dysphoria manifests itself in a way that is much more dependent on physical factors than gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is mostly a social phenomenon in how people present themselves, but often there is a sexual dysphoria aspect going on along with it, which gets into a whole other set of discussions that aren't entirely relevant. Otherkin. Otherkin are a subculture of people who identify as partially or entirely non-human. Some Otherkin believe their identity derives from spiritual phenomena, such as possessing a non-human soul, reincarnation, or the will of God, ancestry, symbolism, or metaphor. Others attribute it to unusual psychology or neurodivergence and do not hold spiritual beliefs on the subject. A non-binary Otherkin who experiences species dysphoria. I can tell you it is actually rather like gender dysphoria. For them it comes in two flavors, a feeling of depression and ache for the body of my therotype, the animal I identify as on an internal level, or a feeling of repulsion at having a body at all, which comes from having another kintype that lacks a physical form. They're very much real experiences and I've had those feelings since I was small, long before I even knew that there were people who identified as being internally something other than human. I'm aware that there will never be any sort of species transition surgery to the degree of a full species transformation, but I do wonder about the transhumanism movement and whether species alteration might be possible. I know of some surgeons who are interested in the subject. I'm not going to hold my breath for it, but I do have ways of coping with it, like wearing the fur of my therotype. Ultimately it doesn't interfere with my life much, though it can be distressing, says a non-binary Otherkin. The Otherkin subculture in part grew out of online communities for people identifying as elves in the early to mid-1990s. The word has since come to be treated as an umbrella term for a number of non-human identity subcultures which developed around the same time. Otherkin, as an adjective, was defined in the Middle English Dictionary, 1981. As a different or an additional kind of, other kinds of. In 2017, the Oxford English Dictionary defined Otherkin as of another kind, other, different. The earliest recorded use of the term Otherkin, in the context of a subculture, appeared in July 1990 and the variant Otherkind was reported as early as April 1990. The word Otherkind was initially coined from the word elfinkind, to refer to non-elf others who joined the communities. The terms Otherkin and Otherkind have since come to encompass a wide variety of unique non-human identities. The term Otherkin includes a broad range of identities. Otherkin may identify as creatures of the natural world, mythology, or popular culture. Examples include but are not limited to the following: aliens, angels, demons, dragons, elves, fairies, foxes, horses, sprites, unicorns, wolves, and fictional characters. Rarer are those who identify as plants, machines, concepts, or natural phenomena such as weather systems. The term Therian refers to people who identify as an animal of the natural world. The species of animal a Therian identifies as is called a therotype. while Therians mainly attribute their experiences of therianthropy to either spirituality or psychology. The way in which they consider their Therian identity is not a defining characteristic of therianthropy. Therians often use the term species dysphoria to describe their feelings of disconnect from their human bodies and their underlying desire to live as their theritype. The identity transspecies is used by some. With regard to their online communities, Otherkin largely function without formal authority structures and mostly focus on support and information gathering, often dividing into more specific groups based on kin type. There are occasional offline gatherings, but the Otherkin network is mostly an online phenomenon. The Therian and vampire subcultures are related to the Otherkin community, and are considered part of it by most Otherkin but are culturally and historically distinct movements of their own, despite some overlap in membership. The word Ultrahuman exists as an umbrella term which intends to encompass all of these subcultures, as well as others such as plurality. Symbol. The earliest symbol used to denote non-human identity was a regular 7-3 heptagram, known as the Elven Star or Fairy Star. It was designed by the Elf Queen's daughters and first published in the Green Egg newsletter in March 1976. Many Otherkin believe in the existence of a multitude of parallel universes, and their belief in the existence of supernatural or sapient non-human beings is grounded in that idea. Joseph P. Laycock, assistant professor of religious studies at Texas State University, considers Otherkin beliefs to have a religious dimension, but asserts that the argument that Otherkin identity claims conform to a substantive definition of religion is problematic. Many Otherkin themselves reject the notion that being Otherkin is a religious belief. Some Otherkin claim to be especially empathic and attuned to nature. Some claim to be able to shift or shift mentally or astrally, meaning that they experience a sense of being in their particular form while not actually changing physically. Moreover, the claim to be able to physically shift is generally looked down on by the community. They may also describe being able to feel phantom limbs, wings, tails and horns, that coordinates with their kin type. Some Otherkin claim to also go through an awakening that alerts them to their kin type. Some Otherkin experience a sense of unease and unhappiness due to the mismatch between their physical body and that of their kin type or theritype. A controversial but frequently made analogy is to gender dysphoria, leading to the terms transspecies or transspeciesism and species dysphoria. Outside viewers may have varying opinions about people who identify as Otherkin, such as considering them psychologically dysfunctional. Reactions often range from disbelief to aggressive antagonism, especially online. Otherkin have been called one of the world's most bizarre subcultures, and a religious movement and a quasi-religion, that in some of its forms, largely only exists on the internet. Although Otherkin beliefs deviate from the definition of religion, they share the primary interest in the paranormal. Laycock argues that the Otherkin community serves existential and social functions commonly associated with religion, and regards it as an alternative nomos that sustains alternate ontologies. He feels that the negative public reaction to the subculture may be because of how these beliefs challenge the predominant social worldview. Professor J. Johnston similarly feels that non-human identity is perhaps not so much pathological as political. According to Nick Mamatus, they represent a dissatisfaction with the modern world, and they have taken fairy lore out of its original context. Daniel Kirby wrote the first academic paper on Otherkin in 2008, which served to introduce the community to other academics. Kirby described Otherkin as sharing ideas with the neo-pagan movement, However, she called this an interim classification, and warned that to construe this group as specifically neo-pagan or techno-pagan obscures the focus of the participants. Despite this, much subsequent research treated the Otherkin community as having an essentially religious character. From 2016 onwards, Otherkin research has taken more of a narrative identity approach, investigating how Otherkin come to understand their experiences. Reviewing prior research, Stephanie C. Shea criticizes the prevailing conception of the Otherkin subculture as being, or being alike to, either a religion or a spirituality. In 4 surveys of furries, N equals 4338, 1761, 951, 1065, depending on the sample, between 25% and 44% responded that they consider themselves to be less than 100% human, compared to 7% of the sample, N equals 802, of the general American population. The oldest internet resource for Otherkin is the Elfenkind Digest, a mailing list started in 1990 by a student at the University of Kentucky for elves and interested observers. Also in the early 1990s, newsgroups such as Alt Horror Werewolves, AHWW, and Alt Fan Dragons on Usenet, which were initially created for fans of these creatures in the context of fantasy and horror literature and films, also developed followings of individuals who identified as mythological beings. On the 6th of February 1995, a document titled The Elven Nation Manifesto was posted to Usenet, including the groups Alt Pagan and Alt Magic. Enough people contacted the original author of the Elven Nation post in good faith for a planned mailing list to spin off from it. Rich Dansky, who worked on the development of Changeling, The Dreaming, said that after the game's release in 1995, the Darkfy listserv had a rampaging debate over how the folks at White Wolf had gotten so much of their existence right, adding, "Finally, one of the list members came to the obvious conclusion that we'd gotten it right because we ourselves were in fact changelings." Dansky denied being non-human. From 3 to the 11th of April 1996, a week-long gathering of theory-anthropes called Eurohowl 96 was hosted in Aberystwyth, Wales, United Kingdom. It was the first known Otherkin gathering outside of the United States. On the 6th of August 2003, the Russian theory-anthrope community hosted their first official gathering held 2003, Void 2003, by the shores of Lake Onega in Petrozavodsk, Republic of Karelia, Russia. On the 18th of December 2005, the Minneapolis-based newspaper Star Tribune published an article about dragons that included a section about the Otherkin blog Draconic. The article quoted from the mission statement of the blog, written by site founder Chris Dragon, making it the first known description of Otherkin to be published in a major newspaper. On the 7th of April 2010, the Swedish newspaper Dagens Nyheter published an article titled Ibland får jag lust att illa som en vag. Sometimes I get the urge to howl like a wolf, in which Lenina, founder of the Swedish language Otherkin and Therian Forum Therianforum.com, described the basics of what it's like to be a Therian. The article is the first known article to offer a description of Therian identity by a major European newspaper. In 2011, the International Anthropomorphic Research Project, IAP, a Canadian-American multidisciplinary research group, expanded the scope of its annual International Furry Survey to include Otherkin and Therians for the first time. Be faithful to that which exists within yourself. The hardest challenge is to be yourself in a world where everyone is trying to make you be somebody else. One day or day one. You decide. You're so much stronger than your excuses. Remember, the world is here for you. On the channel biography there's an email address. You can write, record yourself, and share the world your pain anonymously. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share. Catch you later.